everyone. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here, and I've really enjoyed the proceedings so far during the day. And I look forward to this third session, also to kind of represent the Gaia Corporation, the industry voice, which I think is a particularly important perspective as we're discussing these issues. It's also, I just want to mention, it's really good to be back in Hasselt. I was trying to think, the first time I was here, met Karen about, has it been 12 years? Something like 12 years, back in 2011. It's just amazing how time flies, and so it's really good to be back here and see us still discussing these topics. So Gaia Corporation, again, as Peter mentioned, I am a senior creative consultant with Gaia Corporation. I'll talk a little bit more about my role at the organization. Just want to walk through kind of the outline of the presentation. We'll talk a little bit about Gaia Corporation for those of you who aren't familiar with the organization. Talk about understanding biological value and how Gaia Corporation looks at biological value. Also want to walk through a case study, and I'll address more of my work at the organization and how we help companies realize value through synthetic biology. Talk a little bit about the future and what we see what is kind of on our radar and what we're looking ahead for. And finally, we'd love to kind of field questions from you about some of the work that we're doing. So jumping right in, a few ideas and important takeaways for Gaia Corporation. We're stewards of the Earth's intellectual property. So again, we've been talking about genetic code and snippets of DNA and whole genomes. And the important thing to remember is that these are actually technology, and they are the property of their owner or their creator. And Gaia Corporation essentially administers this intellectual property on the Earth's behalf through licensing and other means. We promote and protect biodiversity, and I think this is a really important concept. For the past 20 years or so, we've been understanding the importance of diversity in ecological systems and business systems and elsewhere. And we've realized that it's critical not only to protect, but to promote. One of the best examples I can think of this was back in 2009. I don't know if you recall back then, but there was a company in the United States called Monsanto that had developed a genetically modified soybean. And what was interesting about soybean is in that year it had about 93% of the entire yield for the country. And just 10 years prior, there were about 6 different strains that were incredibly viable. And it wasn't that this particular seed by Monsanto was dominant in ecological terms, but it was dominant in business terms. It had a marketing engine behind it. It had business litigation against farmers using different crops or misusing Monsanto crops, finance, right? All of these business factors were what made this seed successful in the environment. And so we essentially provide those same sorts of services to naturally occurring seeds and naturally occurring life. We manage synthetic biological risk. So it's quite funny when you look back and you think about the scientists and the artists and some of the labs and corporations with kind of breathless abandon racing into the area of synthetic biology. And we now know, of course, that there are risks, and there are significant risks. And so Gaia works to manage and mitigate those risks. We also govern through transparent, complete, and free biomarkets. So in the past, we realized that we had these quite funny distinctions between human markets and things that had a cost associated with them, and nature, which was free and unlimited. And slowly, through cap and trade and other ideas, we began to move these elements of nature into human markets. And Gaia Corporation completely eliminates that false division, bringing all things that were in nature, allowing them to participate in human markets, essentially including what were the disenfranchised of the world, allowing them to participate in those markets. And finally, we work within existing governance and IP structures. So since about 2012 or so, there have been no significant changes to intellectual property law or governance that has allowed our existence, but rather we're kind of operating within those. And the real change has been not what ownership is, but rather who is the owner. So let me talk a little bit more about this. And I think this is one of the mindset changes you'll recall that was really critical for Gaia Corporation to exist and to do the work that we do. So if you think about invention as a process that leads to intellectual property, right, the outcomes deserve some sort of protection in the market. What's been interesting with synthetic biology is the outcomes between invention and evolution are indistinguishable. We can't see the difference between what's come out of the lab and what's been kind of created by nature through evolution over millions of years. And so if it follows that these are just procedural differences and the outcomes are identical, then the procedure of evolution also produces outcomes that deserve intellectual property. And so that was, I think, the significant change that happened in our culture that has allowed for, again, a Gaia Corporation. So a lot of people ask, well, how are these administered? And of course, the genomes are still valuable to the public and to others to use. And so we do that through licensing. And I'll share kind of a little bit of behind the scenes about how we do our licensing. But of course, we have to talk to some of the accountants, the financiers, to get into the details of this. But essentially, we start with each genome and kind of a chassis that we're licensing. And we ask, what's the human utility of the creation that will be coming out of the lab? What will it mean to the public and to the human species? And then we look at eco-utility. In the past, that's where the analysis ended, is what does this mean for humans? But what does this mean for the entire ecology and the entire environment? And what's the utility for kind of the surrounding organisms that will be interacting with this creation of synthetic biology? We look at that in terms of the percentage of biomass. So what are we talking about? Would this be a small isolated organism in a relatively isolated environment, or does it have the potential to affect larger environments like oceans or atmospheres? And what's the potential reach of the organism? And also look at the risk associated with that. Again, these things are inherently risky. There's a danger with what you're doing, and there's so much that is currently unknown about the science. And it's much like Madame Curie, running her hands through vats of uranium. We just don't know the details of what we're doing yet. And so we don't want to end progress, but it's critical that we mitigate the risk associated with this progress. Also the Gaia Factor, I don't want to talk too much about that, again, it's proprietary, but imagine if you remember back in the day the Google algorithm. I think of this as kind of the special sauce or behind our calculations. We look at total energy consumption as we're calculating this. So again, energy is not unlimited. There's a finite amount of energy, embodied energy in the Earth. There's a finite amount of energy coming from the sun that's being gathered. And so we need to understand this organism in terms of its energy consumption. We're taking away from something as we create this new thing. And finally, we bring all of this kind of back into the market. So we want to understand this new product in global gross product terms. So what does it mean economically to the system? Okay, well, now this, so some background on Gaia. This is where it gets a lot of fun for me. I currently head up the global products group, and so we work with companies developing new products through synthetic biology. And essentially what happens is these companies come to us with things that they're looking at, concerns that they might have, and then we work to develop possible solutions through our catalog of genomic information. So whether we're licensing a single gene, whether we're licensing an entire genome as a chassis, those are options that we consider as we're consulting with them. So this was a great example of work that we did with Nike. And Nike came to us, they were following two major trends. And the first was this trend kind of around the idea of quantified self. Do you remember these small devices that people would put in their shoes and begin running? It would track kind of steps and pace times. Individuals would wear halters, gathering heart rate information. So all of this, again, is as data to understand the self. And I remember those little bricks that we used to carry around. I forget what they're called. iPod, yeah, that's it. The iPods. So funny little things that we would have to begin gathering this data. There was another another trend that they were following, and the idea of barefoot running. And this was just classic, research coming out that realized that the human leg has evolved to run over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. And essentially, through our technology or our new fancy trainers and things, we had negatively impacted the human gait. We'd actually changed the gait in a way that didn't allow the leg to handle the running load that it had evolved to handle. So people began throwing out their shoes and using kind of these enhanced socks to sort of return to nature and return to the natural gait that had evolved over time. And so Nike comes to us with these kind of trends, and for us there was a clear opportunity for Nike, and we licensed to them the chassis of standard tapeworm. And the tapeworm was a really clear choice. The tapeworm is another organism that's evolved with humankind over tens of thousands of years, and it's really only been in the last few hundred years that we've begun to live without tapeworms because of changes in hygiene and other things. But we even saw back in 2010 or so individuals actually reintroducing different types of worms into the body as a way to treat things like asthma or explore new types of treatments, realizing that this was kind of a symbiotic relationship that had disappeared but had evolved over time, and there might be other types of value there that we weren't understanding. So we licensed the genome of this organism to Nike, and I can't resist but show you a little of the advertising. I love these guys. They just, they really know how to do it, but they're beautiful, just that run with nature, that return to nature, this organism being a part of that system. And this one's beautiful. All of the equipment of the athlete and the runner, so the musculoskeletal system, the circulatory system, the lungs, and the tapeworm right there as a critical part of that system. So we came up and developed the TW+, and this is a genetically modified tapeworm. The athlete actually ingests the tapeworm along with the tracer pill and then lives with the worm for 6 months to a year, at which point a second tracer pill is taken, the worm is voided, and then sent into Nike. Nike then takes the worm and analyzes it on kind of a genetic level over the course of its life, and it's been growing with the athlete over that time. And so you can imagine it's just this perfect sensor of what's been going on within the body of the organism, of the athlete. And so all of this data about nutrition, about blood sugar, about hormones coursing through the body can then be given back to the athlete aligned with more traditional metrics and gives us great insight to improve performance. So you can imagine when this hit the market, it was kind of a wild success. I don't know if you guys remember that, I forget the year, 18 or something. But TW Plus, again, a wild success. Then we had the version 2 that we launched about a year later. And the version 2, we cleaned up some of the kind of errors we were seeing in the code. We thought we had a sterile product when we began, only to discover that the kind of reproduction aspects of the worm had slipped back in. And you can imagine that's problematic for the athlete, but even more so for Nike when you're talking about bottom line of these products and they're creating themselves for free. I'm actually, I don't know if do we have any TW Plus users out there? I'm on my second V2 now, and I've been really happy with the data I got from my first run, so this has been great. And I'm kind of excited to share that the V3 is coming out very soon. And this is an organism that, in addition to the tracking, actually allows for the production of drugs within the human body in response to the kind of the feedback that it's getting from the athlete. So this is I think an exciting development for Nike, and again, all coming back to this initial chassis of an evolved organism, kind of the height of symbiotic athlete relationships. Finally, just one more advertisement. These guys are just genius. So I think this is going to be big. The V3 should be big. So finally, I just want to talk a little bit about what the future holds for Gaia Corporation, what we're thinking about. We're really excited actually by the synthetic bio DIY movement. So you've got people now, at homegrown labs, they're in the garages, you've got teenage kids doing this in their bedrooms, which the BioBricks registry is almost complete now, and people, it's open source, people have access to that. We think that's great. We're excited about those developments, but what's critical is, again, that these things aren't free. That there's a cost associated with those activities, and there's a potential risk associated with those activities. So we're fine with it happening, but it's important that those licensing fees are paid to Gaia Corporation, that the owner, the Earth, through evolution, the development of those genetic codes, receives appropriate compensation for that work. So again, we're excited about the DIY movement, but I believe it needs to be mitigated in that way. We're also excited to mention that element and chemical product lines will be kind of coming online soon. So where we mostly work in genomic information, we're really excited that other elements and chemicals will be measured in this way, and that consumption, our individual consumption of things like water and air will be able to be appropriately measured and kind of tacked back those costs and to each of us as users and each organism as users. Yeah, any questions? Yes.
I wonder what you're doing when you decide to license out some genes and you find out that there's already a private patent holder on it.
Yeah. So that was a funny thing that used to happen back in the 1980s, where someone could, and 90s, and even up to maybe 2011 or so, before that practice got ended. But the idea that you could sequence a genome and then sequencing equal patentability, which is quite a quaint idea. In reality, the genome was already developed by nature, and so that the rights existed with nature as the owner through its evolutionary process. So one example of that, you might remember there was a company in the United States that owned the breast cancer gene, and in about 2013, a number of lawsuits came against the company, but not for, people at the time, or before that, wanted to free the gene for research, so they said no one owned it. But the best thing that was done was the flip, that the company did own it, and they were also responsible for kind of the factors in the rest of the world because of that gene. So if they're willing to own the gene, then they're also responsible for the breast cancer and the damages caused by it. And that was, I think, a critical twist in our thinking, in about the mid-10s that helped us move forward. Yeah.
When was it, 2013?
That was 2013, yeah, that's right. I'm sorry, my memory with these dates is quite tricky. Other questions or thoughts? Yes?
I don't understand a thing.
Yes.
Because you speak about 2013, there stands 2023. What is Gaia Corporation?
Yes.
How can it, is it a really existing organization? I don't suppose so.
In 2023, it is a real corporation.
Okay,
Yes.
and who will be owning it?
That's a great question. We get a lot of questions about ownership. Gaia Corporation actually has no shareholders. There's an important distinction that we're not an NGO, we're actually a corporation. But you could consider our shareholders kind of the Earth's genetic, or kind of the Earth's creation. So plants and animals are kind of our shareholders. And our work and our existence is kind of, again, to protect biodiversity, to appropriately license that genetic intellectual property. So that's a great question on ownership. Other questions?
How can you get legitimation from the world?
Yes, that was no small task. But you'll remember in about 2012, actually even before that, there began to be some activity out of the United Nations where we began to see kind of a call for declaration of Earth's rights. Again, this silly idea that humans actually had domain or dominion over the rest of the Earth, and that we somehow had a greater right to exist than anything else in the biome was quite quaint. And so we began to see movement in the United Nations and other international communities with that kind of realization in mind. So the legitimacy came there. We still work, there's certain governments that we struggle to interact with, but we're much closer in our goals of kind of total, I won't say domination, but that's a joke in the company.
Didn't you get problems, or likely get problems with legal rights activists for the tapeworms?
No, I don't recall any. The tapeworm was actually quite a mild, synthetic biological invention compared to many that we had seen. So I don't recall any particular concerns about that. Again, the tapeworm is being licensed appropriately, so tapeworm accounts are appropriately credited for their use. We're not talking about an organism slavery here. We're talking about fair compensation for the work that's being done within the athlete's body. So, yeah, very good.
What are you doing with the license income? Do you have special projects?
Yeah.
To fund with this? Or?
Yeah, you can. There is significant income that comes from this, and you can imagine most of it is actually spent on just administration of the different product lines that we're supporting. Also, we're always working to increase our modeling, kind of our understanding of the systems that we're administering, and then working with kind of groups like mine to develop some of these new options for synthetic biology. So, yeah. Yes.
How do you charge the tapeworms for the carbon credits that they use when they eat the food of the runner?
Yeah. Again, those are some of the work moving towards total measurement that we're looking at. So in some of the systems, we're not appropriately capturing every interaction, but we have some fudge factors in those sorts of scenarios that actually allow it to work. But we do see today, and I'm glad you brought that up, that we will have a total measurement in those interactions, and that I don't know which direction that will actually change the cost, because you could potentially see that the tapeworm is as it's consuming food actually helping the athlete in new and different ways that we didn't understand before. So yeah, they're thinner, for example. But so it could potentially be a credit or it could be a debit, but we won't know until we really understand the totality of the interaction. Yes?
There were rumors that you were funded by military research departments of the United States. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
I think they're unfounded. That's the company line. I think early on, actually kind of research going on through militaries actually started a lot of this push, and it was concern then by those from the public for research going on by those groups that I think brought about some of this movement towards a mitigation of the types of risks that are going on. So again, it was thrilling back in the day, the work that DARPA and others were doing, but we were reckless. We moved forward into a system that we had no idea what we were doing. And again, it's quaint when we think about a human vetting of these problems. I studied it for a year. I had 1,000 people in my trial. It's silly. And we looked to nature, who has vetted these systems over millions of years and found kind of these equilibriums, this diversity, this resilience in the system. And we want to continue to play, but we're going to play in a way that evolution has taught us to play. So, great question. Other thoughts? Okay.
Just once more.
Yes.
From the total income you have, how much do you recompensate nature?
Yeah, it's actually a significant amount. So.
What is significant? Is it double digit?
Yeah, I'd have to. I forget. It's more than trillions of dollars. I forget with inflation what we're at now. But it's significant, and be assured that money is going towards nature. There aren't personal fortunes being developed by this. Again, we see the personal fortune as the whole biome. People sometimes look at Gaia Corporation and they say, oh, look at those plants, they're getting all that money, or look at those organisms. But in reality, we're supporting the system in a way that allows all of us to enjoy the life that we do. And can, in a sense, promise this sort of sustainability into the future. Yes?
You had a formula over there with the Gaia flavor?
The Gaia Factor, yes.
Yes, which was proper...
It's proprietary, yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
how can it be... I can't...
Oh, proprietary?
Yes, how can it be that way? Because I think it should be open if you represent.
Yeah, I know there are discussions around the organization that should be a move. I think part of it is just the complexity of, in a way, we don't want to open that up for debate. If there are no personal fortunes being being kind of determined in this scenario, then we'd actually like to keep it something that we're kind of applying equally across the genome. And so we don't want that kind of point of kind of hang up to become politicized in any way. But I personally, I agree with you. I think that we'd like to get to the point where this is an agreed upon method, and I think over time too, as we gather more data, we'll get to a point where the modeling is so accurate that we're not making, there isn't a Gaia factor, there is almost a natural constant that we're dealing with there, something like the speed of light. Would I see a future iteration of Gaia factor?